The critical flaw in my initial theory was not an act of deception. It was not a buried document, nor was it a concealed financial trail. The discrepancy was something far more basic: physical stature. The figure on Nancy Guthrie's porch, the silhouette captured by a doorbell camera in the black of night, was profiled by the FBI as standing between 5'9" and 5'10". An average build. Not exceptionally tall, not particularly short. Tommaso Cioni is taller than that, and if the man at the door is not Tommaso, the entire premise of my previous investigation collapses. I have reviewed every observation you have shared, and now I believe I've uncovered the missing variable, and its implications are staggering. But before we examine that name, we must return to the night the world shifted. January 31st. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had resided in the same Tucson home since 1985. It was a house defined by desert flora in its yard, a security gate guarding the entrance, and a community of long-standing neighbors. Between 9:30 and 9:50 that evening, her son-in-law, Tommaso, escorted her home. His account states he saw her enter the residence. His account states she was secure. 4 hours later, an individual approached her front door under the cover of darkness. The camera recorded his arrival. He was masked. He wore gloves. He shouldered a black Ozark Trail backpack. Around his waist, he wore what appeared to be a belly band holster. He lifted a hand toward the camera's lens. He made contact. And then, he gained entry. Nancy Guthrie has never been seen again. No body has been recovered. No ransom demand was ever made. Not a single confirmed sighting, only an unnerving silence. And it is this silence that gives the case its profound weight. Because when a person vanishes in this manner, only two scenarios exist: the act was random or the act was orchestrated. Sheriff Nanos has stated his belief that Nancy was a specific target, not a crime of opportunity. Targeted, and for a crime to be targeted, an individual had to select her. An individual had to possess knowledge of her. An individual had to be familiar with her patterns. An individual had to know the precise moment she would be vulnerable. And that leads us back to the central contradiction. If Tommaso is physically too tall to be the figure on the porch, then perhaps he simply wasn't that person. Perhaps he didn't need to be. Perhaps this operation involved two roles, an architect and an enforcer. Allow me to illustrate the concept. Imagine the construction of a house. One person is responsible for the blueprints. That is the architect. A different person wields the hammer. That is the builder. Both are essential to the final structure, yet only one is ever seen holding the tool. In my last analysis, it was suggested that Tommaso might have been the architect, the one with intimate knowledge of the home, the surveillance systems, the rhythms of Nancy's life. But if he was not the one to execute the plan that night, then another person was. Someone of the correct height. Someone skilled in entering a home in the dark. Someone unafraid of confronting an elderly woman. Someone who may have a history of such actions. This is where the missing piece may fit. His name is Dominic Aaron Lee Evans. Now, before any conclusions are drawn, listen with absolute clarity. No law enforcement body has officially named Dominic Evans as a person of interest. The FBI has not taken him into custody. The sheriff has filed no charges against him. All information I am about to present is derived from public records, facts that are verifiable by anyone. This is not an accusation. It is an exploration. Who is Dominic Evans? To begin to understand, we must rewind the clock nearly 20 years to 2007, Tucson, Arizona. Through Craigslist advertisements, three men, strangers to one another, connected over music. One was a drummer, one a guitarist, one a bassist and vocalist. The band they formed was called Early Black. Dominic was on drums. Tommaso was on bass and vocals. They rehearsed together, they laid down tracks together, they played gigs in small venues across Tucson, Phoenix, and Flagstaff. They never achieved widespread fame, but over 19 years, they forged a deep connection. 19 years is more than a casual acquaintance. It encompasses birthdays, holidays, long road trips to performances, and late-night conversations after practice. It is the kind of bond where you know someone's troubles, their financial pressures, their family dynamics. And throughout those 19 years, Tommaso was married to the daughter of Nancy Guthrie. This implies Dominic would have been aware of the family. He would have heard the name Savannah. He would have heard the name Nancy. Not through any sinister surveillance, but because that is the nature of friendship. People share the details of their lives. And in a crime that may hinge on betrayal, such long-standing relationships are significant. Now, we must turn to a more difficult subject. Dominic Evans has a criminal history in Pima County, Arizona. Publicly available records document felony charges, including burglary, robbery, theft, embezzlement, and driving under the influence. Again, these are public records. I want you to consider the real-world meaning of these legal terms. Burglary signifies unlawfully entering a premises with the intent to commit a crime, not simple shoplifting. It means breaching a structure, a home. Robbery is distinct from ordinary theft. Robbery is the act of taking property by employing force or the threat of force. It means confronting a person face to face and overpowering them. An act like that requires a very specific kind of mental calculus. There is a line that most people will never cross. To enter a person's home in the dead of night, to confront them, and to take them away that requires stepping over it. The figure on the doorbell camera shows no signs of panic. His movements are deliberate, composed. He moves with a clear objective, touching the camera with an unnerving familiarity, as if he understands its function. He is wearing gloves. This is not the profile of some random, intoxicated person. This is the portrait of someone executing a plan. Now, does a past conviction mean an individual is destined to offend again? No. People are capable of change, of rebuilding their lives. That is an undeniable truth. But when constructing a profile based on a specific skill set, history becomes critical. And you have to ask, who in Tommaso's world possessed the ability to enter a home silently? Who would have the composure to face another human being in the dark without faltering? Who would know how to move without being seen? For that, you look to a person's past. Burglary provides that kind of education. Robbery provides that kind of experience. Those are lessons that are not easily unlearned. They become part of your physical memory, like a rhythm a drummer can never forget. And then there was the height. The FBI estimated between 5'9" and 5'10". Dominic Evans falls squarely within that range. He had an average build and facial hair. Some online researchers even identified what might be a wrist tattoo in old footage of his band. But a faint image of a tattoo is hardly definitive proof. Low-resolution footage is a minefield of misinterpretation. Lighting can deceive the eye. Angles can distort reality. Masks conceal the truth. So, you look beyond faces. You search for patterns. You search for patterns in relationships, in proximity. Dominic had been a resident of the Tucson area for years. Nancy lived in the Catalina foothills. Tommaso and Annie lived about 4 miles away from her. When plotted on a map, these locations form a tight, geographic triangle in northern Tucson. Close. Convenient. If an individual were to orchestrate an event that demanded intimate knowledge of the area, the ability to navigate its roads in darkness, and a swift exit strategy, living inside that triangle would be a profound advantage. But geography isn't the most compelling element here. The most powerful evidence is what forensics uncovered after Nancy was gone. 2 DNA profiles belonging to 2 different, unknown males. The first DNA sample was lifted from a glove discovered about 2 miles from Nancy's home. The glove appeared to be a match for the one worn by the suspect on the porch. The DNA on it did not belong to Nancy. It did not belong to any member of her family, and it produced no hits in the FBI's national database. The second DNA profile was extracted from biological evidence found inside Nancy's house, and the sheriff's department confirmed a fact of critical importance. The DNA from inside the home was not a match for the DNA on the glove. 2 profiles, 2 different people. The inescapable conclusion was that at least 2 individuals had left their genetic material behind. Not 1, 2. Now, pause for a moment. If 2 people were involved, then the initial confusion about height is no longer a problem. One could be taller, the other shorter. One could be the planner, the other, the executor, the architect, and the operative. But how could 2 people coordinate this? Think about Nancy. She was 84 years old. She had a pacemaker and limited mobility. She could not be rushed down a driveway. She could not be forced into a car without creating significant medical risk. The abduction itself would have taken time. Time that demanded a lookout. Time that required someone to watch for a neighbor's light, for a passing car, Time to ensure no dog's bark shattered the silence. The person inside with the victim could not simultaneously be the eyes on the street. This points to coordination, and coordination is built upon a foundation of trust, the kind of trust often forged through a long-term relationship. Now, let us return to January 23rd, 8 days before Nancy vanished. Another strange incident occurred. A man was captured on camera, walking backward near her home. He looked completely out of place. Some believe this was a rehearsal, a dry run, a test of camera angles, a test of response times. If two people were involved, it's possible both were present that night. Perhaps one did the walking, and perhaps the other sat in a car watching, timing, counting. And here is a critical point. On February 1st, the night of the crime, the suspects could have prepared. They could have left their phones at home. They could have used a different car. They could have constructed an alibi. But the reconnaissance on January 23rd was meant to be invisible. No one was ever supposed to know it happened. So if two phones were near Nancy's house on January 23rd, and those very same two phones were back on February 1st, cell tower data could reveal that exact pattern. Phones connect to towers automatically. They leave digital footprints even when idle. Investigators can map and compare those footprints. What if two devices were shown to have traveled the same route on both nights? That is powerful evidence. And then there were the ransom-style emails sent to media outlets. One message used the peculiar phrase, "the main individual," not the kidnapper. Not the man, the main individual. That choice of words suggests roles, a hierarchy, as if the writer knows that more than one person was involved. One expert noted the writer sounds close to the flame, dangerously close to the crime itself. I have enough proximity to understand the particulars, but not enough to feel insulated from the danger. When a select few hold a secret, that circle of trust is inherently fragile, especially with a $200,000 reward on the table. Money has a way of testing allegiances. It scrutinizes friendships. It can erode a 19-year bond. Because once DNA analysis points toward a suspect and genealogical tracing constructs family trees from distant relatives on ancestry sites, a vow of silence becomes nearly impossible to maintain. And this is where the narrative pivots. Because what comes next is a study in what happens when pressure becomes unbearable. When two men, connected by a 19-year history, simultaneously retreat into silence, this is the moment the investigation enters its most critical stage, when the forensic clock begins its countdown, and a single missing element could either fortify the entire case or cause it to collapse. But before we press on, we must examine a detail that seems trivial, almost incidental: the front gate at Nancy's residence. It appears insignificant, yet the smallest clues often echo the loudest. In Tucson, it's common for houses to have a dual-door system. There's the primary front door, but before you reach it, there's a formidable metal security gate, a second line of defense. Nancy's home was no different. Now, recall the surveillance footage. The figure approaches the entrance. There is no sign of a struggle. There is no kicking, no prying, no evidence of tools. He simply extends a hand and obscures the camera. He then seems to advance, unimpeded. The footage reveals no distinct moment of him forcing his way through a secured barrier. This leaves us with two stark possibilities. The first, Nancy, at 84 years old, simply forgot to lock her gate. She had lived in that home for decades, in what she perceived as a tranquil neighborhood. Perhaps she felt secure. Maybe the thought of a predator arriving in the dead of night never crossed her mind. It's a plausible scenario. But there is an alternative. That someone intentionally left that gate unsecured, someone present at the house earlier that evening. An individual familiar with the property, someone who understood that a locked gate would render the entire plan impossible. Tommaso escorted Nancy home around 9:30 or 9:50 p.m. His account states he saw her safely inside. He claims he was certain she was secure. But did he double-check the outer gate before he departed? Did he hear the definitive click of the latch? Or was it left just ajar enough for an intruder to slip through hours later? To be clear, this is not an accusation. It is a fundamental question, because the man on that porch did not move like someone expecting resistance. He moved like someone walking a prearranged path, one that had been meticulously cleared for him. And a cleared path implies one thing above all else: coordination. Now, let's pull back and survey the entire landscape. Two distinct DNA profiles, suggesting two perpetrators. A probable dry run on January 23rd, a specifically chosen target, an unnervingly calm entry, a silent abduction, and no getaway vehicle ever identified. No neighbors heard a scream. There have been no confirmed sightings since. This was not an act of chaos. It was controlled, and control demands planning. Planning, in turn, demands communication. So if this was a two-person operation, how did they coordinate? Phones are the obvious answer, texts, calls, but any seasoned criminal knows that phones create a digital footprint. Perhaps they met in person, used encrypted apps, or left their devices behind. But one piece of data is notoriously difficult to hide: location history logged by cell towers. Even when a phone is idle, it pings the nearest towers, and every one of those pings creates a permanent record. Law enforcement can execute what's known as a tower dump, requesting a log of every single device that connected to specific towers within a given time frame. By running a tower dump for the area on the night of January 23rd and again for February 1st, investigators could cross-reference those two lists. If the same two devices appear near Nancy's home on both nights, it ceases to be a coincidence. It becomes a pattern. And patterns are what prosecutors build cases on, because while a coincidence might happen once, it is highly improbable for it to happen twice, in the exact same location, at the exact same time, involving the exact same individuals. Now, consider this. Two phones, both in the vicinity of Nancy's house on January 23rd. Those same two phones, back in that exact location on February 1st. Both of them registered to individuals who know one another. Individuals bound by a 19-year friendship. That discovery wouldn't just be suspicious, it would be damning. And we have to remember, the events of January 23rd were never meant to see the light of day. If that was indeed a rehearsal, the perpetrators likely felt invisible. They probably carried their phones as usual. They probably used their own vehicles. It likely never occurred to them that that night would ever come under scrutiny. But the moment the backward walker footage surfaced, that night was cast into the spotlight. It became everything. Which brings us back to the silence. In the days after Nancy vanished, the media laid siege to Tommaso's home. Reporters camped outside his door, their cameras trained on his every move. And then, abruptly, everything went quiet. According to News Nation, Tommaso and his family vanished from the public eye. He had vanished from public view. No sightings at his home, no statements to the press, no appearances anywhere. Of course, there could be innocent reasons. Perhaps his attorney had advised a complete media blackout. He might have been crippled by the attention, seeking refuge in some private, undisclosed location. That's plausible. But then there's the silence from Dominic Evans. Not a single public statement, no media engagement, no activity on social media, not even a token message expressing hope for Nancy's safe return. Absolutely nothing. In our hyper-connected age, most people would offer some public gesture, however small, even if it's just a call for prayers. Silence is an ambiguous state, but a synchronized silence between two men who share a deep history is something else entirely. When it occurs in perfect tandem, it feels orchestrated, as if both were following the same chilling advice. Do not speak. Do not post. Just wait. And it's possible they are both waiting for the very same thing, the results of the DNA analysis. Because the moment those results are finalized, they're uploaded into a national database. A match would give investigators an answer almost instantly. In the absence of a match, the painstaking work of genetic genealogy begins. This process delves into the DNA of distant family members, cousins, second cousins, people who may have casually used ancestry websites for their own curiosity. From that starting point, detectives meticulously construct family trees, tracing each branch until every limb narrows down to a single name. The process can stretch for weeks, sometimes months, but its power is undeniable. It has cracked cold cases that have laid dormant for decades. And this investigation is new. The records are fresh, the data more readily accessible. Now, consider the implications of this. If either of the DNA profiles belongs to an individual with a criminal history in Arizona, their genetic material may already be on file. Should that be the case, and should a match be found, the wait could be over in an instant. A very, very short wait. Yet, even without a direct hit in the criminal database, the web of genealogy can still draw the net tighter around a suspect. And if the name that emerges from that web leads back to someone within the inner circle, a person bound by a 19-year friendship, then the speculative framework we've outlined hardens from a mere theory into a terrifying structure. But there's another, more cryptic layer to this mystery: the ransom-style emails. In one message, the author claims to know the identity of the main individual. That phrasing is peculiar. If a lone kidnapper was responsible, why not simply say the kidnapper? Why invent a title? Titles imply structure. They suggest a hierarchy, like a group project with a leader and subordinates. One person is the main individual, and the others are merely assistants. The email's author also stated they were gambling for his safety. This sounds like the voice of someone perilously close to the danger, close enough to be afraid, close enough to possess hidden knowledge, but not powerful enough to speak without fear. If a circle of people holds the secret of what happened that night, however small, an immense pressure will begin to test its bonds. The reward now stands at $200,000. For many, that is an amount of money that could reshape a life. It's enough to sever friendships. It's enough to shatter loyalty, especially if one person begins to suspect that DNA evidence will inevitably point to them anyway. And there is another factor to weigh. If two individuals were behind this crime, the trust between them would have to be absolute. Each must believe, without a shred of doubt, that the other will not talk, will not panic, and will not make a fatal error. But human beings are fallible. We always make mistakes. Some are small, some are catastrophic, but even the smallest mistakes can leave the biggest trails. Like a single glove discovered 2 miles from the scene. Like a figure walking backward captured on a security camera. Like a strange phrase in an email that unintentionally reveals too much. And this is the point where the narrative constricts, because every detail we've examined funnels down into a single, agonizing question. If two people were involved, who will be the first to crack? The architect of the plan, or the one who carried it out? And what happens when one of them concludes that silence is no longer a shield? Because at first, silence feels like a fortress. It feels impenetrable. Say nothing, and you can't contradict your story. Say nothing, and you can't make a slip of the tongue. Say nothing, and you deny investigators any new threads to pull. But silence is also a pressure cooker. The pressure mounts as news crews camp outside a home. The pressure intensifies as DNA tests progress through the lab. The pressure becomes unbearable as the reward money climbs higher. And pressure changes people. It makes them look at their partners in a new light. Picture two people, isolated in their separate homes, watching the exact same news reports, hearing the same 2 words, genetic genealogy. Both of them hear the mention of 2 distinct DNA profiles. Both of them know precisely where they were on January 23rd and February 1st. In times of calm, trust is simple. But trust becomes fragile when helicopters circle overhead and federal agents begin knocking on doors in the neighborhood. Every ring of the phone sparks a question. Is this it? Every car that slows down on your street makes you wonder, is this the moment? And when one person starts to believe the other is the weak link, that seed of doubt begins to grow into something monstrous. Now, we must turn to motive. Because a theory without a plausible motive is just an empty shell. Sheriff Nanos declared that Nancy was targeted. That means she was chosen for a reason. What drives someone to target an 84-year-old woman? In cases of this nature, the motives typically distill down to a few fundamental possibilities. The pursuit of money, the need for control, a deeply held personal grievance, or the desire for access to something valuable. Nancy had resided in her home for decades, and properties in the Catalina foothills command a high price. A review of property records reveals the chain of ownership. Yet something else emerged from the months preceding Nancy's disappearance. A power of attorney document, signed just 8 months prior. A power of attorney grants one individual legal authority over the financial affairs of another. By itself, such a document is not proof of any wrongdoing. It is a common, even normal, practice for families to arrange a power of attorney for their elderly parents. But when placed within the timeline of events, its significance shifts. It becomes a critical marker. 8 months before she vanished, followed by the night of the rehearsal, the drop-off, and then the abduction. When constructing a case, investigators assemble timelines. They arrange events in chronological sequence, searching for deviations from the norm. They scrutinize for unusual activity. They hunt for patterns. And what may appear innocuous at first can later become a piece of crucial evidence. Consider, once again, the necessary skill sets. Burglary imparts the knowledge of entry. Robbery teaches the art of confrontation. Embezzlement, however, demands a capacity for long-term deception. And music, strangely enough, instills a sense of rhythm and coordination. A drummer masters timing. A drummer learns to maintain a steady cadence while chaos unfolds around them. This alone does not implicate someone in a crime, but it does demonstrate a particular kind of discipline. Now, envision two individuals meticulously planning a complex operation. One person possesses intimate knowledge of the residence. The other is responsible for the physical execution. Their conversations would have to be painstakingly detailed. Where to park the vehicle, the precise path to take, the location of every camera, the time it takes to move from the door to the driveway, the window of opportunity before a neighbor might take notice. They would have to predetermine who would carry the backpack, who would wear the holster, who would be tasked with disabling the camera, and who would serve as the lookout on the street. These are not decisions born of panic. These are choices made with cold calculation. And the footage from the porch does not depict panic. It depicts absolute control. Then there is another element that commands attention: the backpack. It's an Ozark Trail, 25-liter model, sold at Walmart. Investigators are now working with the retail corporation to identify every recent purchase. They are asking how many of this specific model were sold in the last 30 to 60 days. Can any of those sales be traced through payment records? Was the transaction made in cash, by card, or online? A backpack seems like a simple object, but a recent purchase leaves a data trail, and data trails invariably lead to names. The holster presents another avenue. Sheriff Nanos characterized it as unique. Investigators are circulating images of it to firearms dealers, asking if anyone recognizes the specific model. If that holster was bought recently, it too could have left a traceable record. Now, try to enter the mindset of the individuals who planned this. They likely believed gloves would prevent fingerprints, and a mask would thwart facial recognition. The backpack conceals their tools. The holster secures their weapon. But what have they overlooked? What about their DNA? While gloves may prevent the transfer of fingerprints, the interior of a glove can become a repository for the wearer's own DNA through sweat and skin cells. The discovery of a single glove 2 miles from the scene implies it was discarded at some point. But why? Perhaps it tore. Perhaps it was simply no longer needed. Perhaps it was tossed from the window of a moving vehicle. And if there were 2 people inside that vehicle, one could drive while the other disposed of the evidence. These are the small movements, the seemingly insignificant mistakes that ultimately solve the most complex cases. Imagine investigators now overlaying vast sets of data. Cell tower dumps, DNA profiles, purchase records, traffic camera footage. They merge it with information from license plate readers. They no longer require a confession. They are hunting for connections. And these connections form a web. A web, once woven around you, is nearly impossible to escape. But there remains an element we have yet to fully confront: the human cost. Nancy Guthrie is not merely a case file. She was a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had lived in the same house for 40 years. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, has released video statements pleading for her mother's safe return. In them, she speaks directly to Nancy's captors. She says, "It is never too late to do the right thing." Those are not words intended for the public. They are a message for someone who may be watching, someone for whom a choice might still exist. If 2 individuals were involved in this act, it is plausible that one feels differently now than they did on that night. Regret has a way of growing. So does fear, especially as the weeks drag on. 23 days, and counting. The passage of time alters a person's state of mind. In the beginning, adrenaline fuels action. Later, the silence becomes crushing. Now, we must consider the greater risk for the perpetrators. Should investigators transition this case to a smaller, long-term task force, the glare of public pressure might fade. Fewer cameras, fewer headlines. But DNA evidence does not forget. Cellular data does not forget. Financial records do not disappear. And people who feel a sense of safety once the cameras are gone may let down their guard. They might travel. They might use their devices more carelessly. They might begin to talk. And sometimes, the moment a suspect believes the world has looked away is the very moment they make their final, fatal slip. Now, ask yourself one simple question. Imagine your name, entirely without merit, linked online to a vulnerable woman's disappearance. What is the instinct? To shout your innocence from the rooftops? To issue a forceful, public denial? Or is the wiser course to remain silent, perhaps offering a quiet expression of sympathy? There's no textbook response. But every action, every choice, becomes a data point for those who study human behavior for a living. They aren't looking for emotion, they're searching for patterns, for consistency or the lack of it. Let's revisit a critical piece of language from the ransom demands, the main individual. The choice of words is deliberate, implying a structure, a hierarchy. If one person is designated as main, it logically follows that others are subordinate. And where there are subordinates, there is vulnerability. Those on the periphery of a crime often feel the most exposed, the least protected. That exposure breeds a powerful catalyst, fear. And fear dismantles predictability. Consider the 19-year friendship at the heart of this. 19 years is an immense span of time, yet even the most enduring bonds can shatter under immense strain. Loyalty is tested by greed, it's tested by fear, but the most unforgiving test of all is forensic. DNA is the silent witness. It has no memory to corrupt, no story to spin, no capacity for deception. It is a binary reality, a match or not a match, and a match unlocks doors. Not just any doors. Doors opened by law enforcement, armed with warrants. Doors that lead to rooms where agents ask questions that make calm composure an impossible feat. The critical question, then, is what unfolds if the DNA points directly to a member of that tight-knit group? What is the fallout? And more importantly, who will act first? Because in this scenario, the first move changes the entire game. The individual who breaks the silence seizes something invaluable. Control of the narrative. It's a foundational principle of the justice system. The first to cooperate often secures the most favorable outcome. Prosecutors don't reward silence, they reward information. They reward a version of honesty. They reward the one who ends the pact of silence. Picture two people, each holding a piece of the truth. Both understand this unspoken rule. Both know that the moment one talks, the ground shifts permanently beneath the other. It's a silent, crushing pressure. But let us turn our attention to an element of the case that has been largely overlooked: the timeline. From the moment Nancy was dropped off at 9:30 p.m. until the suspect's appearance around 1:30 or 2 a.m., a 4-hour window exists. 4 hours is a significant gap. It's ample time for a person to get home, time enough to make calls, to plan, to coordinate. If this were an impulsive act, that 4-hour void seems illogical. However, if it were premeditated, that gap transforms into a window of preparation. A window in which an individual could leave their home, rendezvous with another, exchange cars, alter their appearance, and pull on a pair of gloves, don a mask, and return under the cloak of night. But then, one must consider the silent eyes of the neighborhood. Suburban Tucson is a web of surveillance. Doorbell cameras, driveway monitors, street-level feeds, and in certain zones, automated license plate readers. Evading identification would demand meticulous planning of the approach, knowing which streets are blind spots, which routes offer the least surveillance. It would require knowing which exits are cloaked in shadow and where a vehicle could be staged beyond the crisp focus of a lens. This isn't tourist information. It's intimate, local knowledge. The kind one acquires only by living in an area, by driving its streets day after day. Now, picture the route south, away from the Catalina foothills and toward the desolate expanse of rural land. Roughly 60 miles south of Tucson, near the border, lies Rio Rico. It's remote, a vast, open desert punctuated by sparse housing and long stretches of dirt road. At 2:30 in the morning, the drive is a journey into darkness, silence, and isolation. For someone seeking absolute seclusion, this landscape is a perfect canvas. To be clear, there is no hard evidence that Nancy was ever brought here, But when detectives ponder the grim logistics of making a person vanish, their eyes are drawn to maps of places just like this. Zones defined by their remoteness, their sparse population, and their lack of electronic witnesses. And if any person of interest has a connection to such a place, that detail becomes a critical piece of the mosaic. Let's move now. Inside the investigation itself. Imagine the scene. Agents gathered around tables. The walls are a collage of maps, photographs of Nancy, and frozen frames from the porch camera. Lists of cell tower locations are pinned up. And alongside them, the names of everyone connected to the family, below a meticulously ordered timeline. January 23rd, January 31st, February 1st, February 9th, February 13th. Every date is a marker. Every movement is a potential clue. Investigators never examine a single piece of evidence in a vacuum. The evidence accumulates, layer upon layer. DNA recovered from a discarded glove, a separate genetic profile discovered inside the house, and a digital trail of cell tower pings, Walmart purchase receipts, and records of holster sales. The investigation weaves through gun store ledgers, traffic camera footage, banking histories, and the telling signature on power of attorney documents. The history of friendships is examined. Criminal records are reviewed. They scrutinize everything, because a case this complex is rarely broken by a single revelation. It's solved by finding the connections between disparate facts. And it's here, in the search for connections, that the theory of an accomplice gains its weight. With two distinct DNA profiles in evidence, the search is not for a lone individual. It is a hunt for two identities. And the moment one is confirmed, that person ceases to be just a suspect, they become leverage. The key to unlocking the other. With one person identified, you can confront them with the science. You can press them about the second DNA profile. You can demand an explanation for phone records. You can force them to account for their time on January 23rd. And under the weight of cold, hard data, silence often breaks. But consider another possibility. What if one of the DNA profiles belongs to a name that has never once been on the investigator's radar? A name that has yet to surface publicly. An individual operating beyond the initial circle of suspicion. In that event, the entire investigative framework must recalibrate, because a sound inquiry is defined by its ability to pivot. The architect and operative theory is merely a tool. If the evidence refutes it, the theory must be discarded. That is the very essence of an honest investigation. But if the evidence starts to align, if names begin to map onto known relationships, then that model becomes the very spine of the case. Now, let us revisit Savannah's public appeal. She addresses the person who took her mother directly. She insists it is not too late. This was more than an emotional plea, it was a strategic maneuver. It was designed to sow doubt in the mind of any accomplice, signaling that a path to mercy might still exist. And the prospect of mercy becomes deeply tempting as fear escalates, especially for someone who was not the prime mover, particularly for an individual who feels they were pulled into something beyond their control, someone who feels secondary to the plot. If a person feels exposed, or starts to believe the mastermind might shift the blame onto them, that person could be the first to step forward. This brings us back to the question of height, the very detail that compelled this entire expansion of the theory. 5'9" to 5'10", an average build, with facial hair. While that description didn't perfectly align with Tommaso, it does not exclude Dominic. And if the DNA evidence from the glove traces back to someone within that specific height range, then the height discrepancy simply vanishes, not because a theory forced it to, but because forensic evidence resolved it. Conversely, if the DNA fails to connect to anyone inside that circle, the theory itself is weakened. And that is a vital point, because a true investigation must acknowledge both its strengths and its vulnerabilities. Now, we must consider human nature. When two people share a secret of this magnitude, their communication becomes a calculated risk. Perhaps they abandon texting. Perhaps they stop making calls. Perhaps they only meet in person. Yet even that carries a significant risk. A neighbor might see, a traffic camera will notice. Phones connect to cell towers even when they are not in use. Modern life leaves an indelible trail. Very few can truly move through the world without leaving a digital footprint. And whoever orchestrated this had the foresight to use gloves, wear a mask, and disable the camera. This points to a degree of forensic awareness. But awareness is not the same as perfection, for perfection is an illusion. Even seasoned professionals make mistakes. And in this case, there were at least two, the rehearsal footage and the dropped glove. They seem like small oversights, but small oversights have the power to unravel the most elaborate plans. Imagine the investigators waiting for the genealogical lab to complete its analysis. Every day that passes brings them closer to a name. When that name finally emerges, the entire investigation will accelerate. Interviews, search warrants, the seizure of devices, deep digital forensics, financial reviews. And if two people are involved, investigators can compare their stories, testing one narrative against the other. Consistency becomes paramount. If their timelines don't align, fractures begin to appear. If phone data contradicts their statements, those fractures widen, and eventually, the entire wall of lies will collapse. This is where the narrative tightens, because we are in a moment where nothing is yet publicly known. But behind the curtain of silence, multiple paths are closing in. The DNA path, the cell tower path, the path of purchase records, a behavioral path. And when all these trails converge on the same individuals, a case transforms from questions into charges. But we have not reached that point. We are in the waiting phase. For anyone hiding a dark secret, this is the most dangerous phase of all, because waiting allows time for thought, and thought can lead to doubt, and doubt can lead to devastating mistakes. Now, entertain one more scenario. What if the DNA from inside the house belongs to someone close to Nancy? Someone who had legitimate access, while the DNA on the glove belongs to an unknown third party. That possibility would complicate everything. It would imply inside access and outside execution, which supports the idea of coordination, but also opens a flood of new questions. This is why investigators are so methodical. They do not rush. They confirm. They cross-check. They build their case slowly, because when they finally act, they must be absolutely certain. And so we return, one last time, to the 19-year friendship. 19 years of a shared past of music rehearsals, recording sessions, late nights, private jokes, and common struggles. A bond forged over that much time would not break easily under pressure. But it is not impossible, especially when the fear of prison becomes a terrifying reality and the vulnerability of being the secondary accomplice sets in. Because history shows that the secondary players who remain silent often face the harshest sentences, while those who cooperate can receive leniency. Anyone who understands this reality might begin to weigh their options. Remain loyal or save yourself. That is the decision point where this story may soon turn. And the moment one person decides to protect themselves above all else, everything changes. Because when one person chooses self-preservation, the silence is broken. And after a long period of quiet, the truth, when it finally emerges, moves with astonishing speed. Picture a sterile interview room, one table, two chairs, a small recorder capturing the silence. An investigator methodically places documents on the table, a collection of cell tower data, DNA reports, transaction logs, and maps. The person sitting opposite sees their own history laid bare in black and white, a definitive timeline of dates, hours, and locations. The investigator's voice remains steady, devoid of threats or accusations. The question is a simple one. Help us understand. And in that precise moment, the very definition of loyalty contorts, pitting the crushing weight of solitude against the prospect of sharing the burden. Let us step back and review what is certain. Nancy Guthrie was a specific target. Two distinct DNA profiles are in evidence. A potential rehearsal of the crime may have occurred 8 days earlier. A man matching the FBI's height description approached her front door with unnerving calm. A glove was later found 2 miles away. Communications, mimicking a ransom demand, used the term main individual. And a long-standing friendship connects two men to the victim's family. These are not opinions or conjecture. They are facts. And yet, the most critical fact remains elusive. Whose DNA is on that glove? Whose genetic material was left inside the house? Which phones were active near the scene on both January 23rd and February 1st? Who bought the backpack? Who purchased the holster? The answers to these questions are pending, and their arrival will either reinforce the entire framework of the investigation or cause it to collapse. If the DNA points to someone outside the initial circle of interest, the theory of the case will be forced to shift. If it points inside that circle, the questions will only become more pointed. But it is vital to remember this. The objective is not to be correct about a theory. The objective is to find Nancy, to reconstruct what happened to her, and to deliver the truth to a family that awakens each day to an agonizing void. And often, that truth does not arrive with the drama of a televised arrest, but in the quiet rustle of paperwork. It is found in laboratory results, in digital records, in a knock at the door just before sunrise. The reward offered is now $200,000. That is a number that sits like a heavy weight in the mind of anyone who knows more than they have admitted. Money alters a person's calculations. Fear alters calculations. The simple passage of time alters calculations. And when two people are bound by a secret, time becomes their greatest enemy. Because secrets gain mass with every passing day. And eventually, the pressure causes them to crack. This is the precipice where we now find ourselves. The discrepancy in height, which once seemed to dismantle a theory, now appears to be the cornerstone of a much larger one. The two DNA profiles strongly suggest this was not the work of a single individual. The footage of a possible rehearsal implies a calculated plan. The language of the ransom notes hints at a deeper conspiracy. The geography reveals proximity. The friendship suggests a profound betrayal of trust. The skill sets involved indicate capability. But ultimately, the truth will be determined by evidence, not by emotion, not by internet forums, not by speculation. The DNA will have its say. The cell towers will tell their story. The purchase records will reveal their secrets. And when they do, the narrative will become clear. Until then, Nancy Guthrie is still missing. She is not a case file. She is not a theory. She is a human being who is owed answers. Somewhere, someone knows precisely what took place on the night of January 31st. Perhaps it is two people, perhaps more. But truth cannot be buried forever. It merely waits, gathering its strength. And when the final piece of the puzzle falls into place, everything will change in an instant. In that moment, the time for guessing will be over. We will be looking at incontrovertible facts, and those facts will either confirm the model of an architect and an operative, or they will reveal a path we never saw. But one way or another, this period of waiting will end. And when it does, the crushing silence that has defined this case will finally break. Nancy Guthrie's story is not over. It is on pause. And the next development, the public release of the DNA analysis, may very well change everything.